Hey there, you awesome people. I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Had Green Lightning. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Not too long after the school festival, Izuku and Tokoyami were called to their internship with Hawks, so he had to leave Yuri with Nejire. Kissing Nejire on the lips and Yuri on the forehead, he bid both of them farewell, as Tokoyami bid farewell to his own friends. The two eventually made it to the train station, and began the journey to Hawks' agency. Once they made it there, the receptionist directed them to the rooms they'd be staying in, and informed them that Hawks was currently out, and would provide directions for them when he returned sometime tomorrow. For now, Izuku made his way to the training room to exercise. The next day when Hawks returned, he was quick to assign Tokoyami to a specific strength training, whilst Izuku had a request. "Can I measure your wings?" Sure kiddo, I'll monitor Tokoyami, will you do that? For whatever reason. Hawks said, chuckling nervously. Oh? Don't worry, there isn't an Ezu-style scheme behind it this time. I just want to figure out a better way to fly, and what better way than using wings. So, you know how to make wings work? Not yet. But I'll figure it out as we go. Sounds like a plan, kiddo. 3 agonizing hours later for Tokoyami after he was forced to do relentless training by Hawks as Izuku was darting all over the place with 2 measuring tapes, a pen and a notebook. This seems unjust. Tokoyami panted as Dark Shadow was cheering him on. Don't worry, once Izuku's ready we're going to make him fly the hard way. Wait, what? An hour later and a good rest and meal for Tokoyami and the trio of hero and students were standing at a cliff. Below was a forest, adjacent to the large stone wall. So? Izuku said, looking down. He was going over his notes again. Hopefully this would work the first time. Good luck, Hawks said, shoving the kid off the cliff. Izuku screamed but was quick to realign himself. He spread his arms. And there was a brief flash of green wings before nothing. He quickly caught himself with several blasts of lightning to slow his descent. Alright, now fly back up, Hawks yelled down. I didn't get the wings to work. I noticed. Get back up your normal flying way, Hawks called back, and Izuku sighed. He noticed Tokoyami's shoulders shaking slightly, evidently in laughter as Dark Shadow was rolling around. Be glad it's not currently your turn, Hawks casually said, obviously targeted at the other student who gulped nervously before stifling more laughter. Come on, kiddo. Plenty more hours of daylight. I brought snacks and everything. Well then. 2 hours of falling and jumping with style later, and Izuku thought he finally figured it out. Whilst he was able to create the structure for prolonged amounts of time, he had to up the density enough to effectively create an equivalent solid. It was effectively impossible to cool the lightning enough to do that, but if he compacted it enough it would do something similar. So, after trying with creating a small sphere of condensed lightning, and throwing it at the trees, causing a surprisingly large explosion that no one needs to know about, Hawks did congratulate him for it though. Hawks threw him off the cliff. And by that, he meant Hawks flew him up twice the height and dropped him. It was exhilarating. Until he realized he was going to reach terminal velocity soon. He couldn't suddenly stop flying, that would more or less rip his muscle out of his skin, because that's where his green lightning would originate from and was attached to, rather than his skin. In other words, it would really hurt. And probably kill him. That was besides the point. Right now, his goal was to start flying safely. So he angled himself downward with several blasts from the back of his heel, so he was facing the ground, before spreading his arms once more. From the end of each of his hands to his waist a green lightning sheet formed, crackling in the air. As he began gently turning his body, he started to catch the wind with it, and was soon gliding just above the tree lines. He smiled with the feeling of wind on his face as he twisted and turned, directing himself as he soared through the sky. Eventually he grew more confident, and he did a dive and a rise, and as he stalled in the air, he fell backwards and dispersed the gliding implements. And when he spread his arms this time, he grew bright green lightning wings. He fell backwards a little before flapping them once. As he did, a booming noise filled the air as the lightning cut through the air like a warm knife through softened butter. He flew back up into the air before soaring back down. Izuku laughed with joy as he continued, the feeling of wind on his face, and the freedom of movement as he soared through the sky. Hawks let out a chuckle before flying up to join him, and Tokoyami soon joined. The winged trio didn't go particularly fast, as Izuku was still getting used to it, and Dark Shadow was. Unpredictable to say the least, but together they flew through the sky as the sun began to set, creating blurs of black, green and red throughout. Izuku was, unsurprisingly, the first to tap out as he was beginning to run low on energy, as flight still took a lot of energy, even if it was more graceful now. And besides, he had been trying to fly all day. He took a seat back at the cliff, and watched as Tokoyami and Hawks began some basic dodge fighting maneuvers, before getting into some serious flying spars, even if Hawks was going easy, and Dark Shadow was messing around a significant amount of time. Izuku watched in contentedness as he took notes regarding the use of the more experienced winged flyers, before he closed his book, and just took in the sight of the two fighting against the beautiful backdrop of the setting sun. Soon the next day came and they were training in the gym. Hawks was setting something up whilst Izuku and Tokoyami were each doing their own strength training. Well, Tokoyami was doing strength training whilst Izuku was doing intense endurance. If Tokoyami was stronger, he'd be better off without Dark Shadow immediately nearby, and it also seemed to have some form of effect on the shadow creature, whilst Izuku's endurance training was good for him to be able to use his quirk for longer, and at more intense levels. In general, they were getting stronger, but it sucked to do so. As does most exercise. Regardless, a few hours of intense exercise later and the two were exhausted as they were each slumped against the wall, and a very proud look Hawks stood before them. Good job you two. That was an intense session. We'll go out patrolling later, for now though I've got something different. Yay. The three of them entered a different room, that was large. Neither student had the energy to question how large it was. In front of them was a massive course complete with burning hoops, spikes, and swinging balls. Is this safe? Tokoyami asked immediately. Who cares? Was Dark Shadow's response, before receiving a smack from the bird-headed boy. Whilst I do like your thinking my shadow-feathered companion, but no. Eraserhead would kill me. And he's scary. It was good to see there was something many heroes agreed on, even if it was not a great sign of the years to come. It's full fire, the spikes are rubber, and the swinging balls are too. They'll leave a mark, that's for sure though. Would definitely recommend against getting entangled with them. And since I don't know if you guys' wings count as physical objects or not. Good luck. Inspiring. Tokoyami responded dryly as Izuku looked over the course. We'll take turns going, and see who goes the fastest without crashing. Hawk said as he stepped up to a section of floor with "Start" messily painted on it. Izuku and Tokoyami watched as Hawks dipped, ducked and dived through the various hoops, managed to squeeze between the swinging balls, and avoiding some of the spikes which were bouncing. Somehow. 3 minutes later he had cleared the course. Alright, that was my trial run. Who wants to go next? Wait, you didn't know it was possible? Izuku asked blankly. Don't extrapolate my words. I suppose I will go, Tokoyami said as Dark Shadow emerged to cover the bird-headed boy before sprouting wings, Dark Embrace. As he called his move name, he leaped off the edge and began flying through the course. He stopped at a few points to plan his next moves before finishing off with a 5-minute time. Not bad. Could have been faster, but with practice you'll do better. Alright, Izuku, you're up. Hawk said, and Izuku stepped up to the starting line. With a breath in, he jumped off and with a crash of thunder he spread his wings, before flapping them once and soaring through to the first obstacle. He stopped in front of the rings of fire, before soaring through the first one and diving down fast into the second, before swooping up into the third. He could feel the heat radiating from his wings slightly, but it wasn't too hot. Regardless, he felt like a game character as he flew in a circle, steadily climbing to make it through the last hoop, before immediately swerving a hard left to avoid a falling spike. He then sped up as another began falling above him before zigzagging around several more. Eventually he made it through all those before making it to the final obstacle. The pendulums. As he flew towards it he waited briefly to see the pattern before flying in. He flew directly past the first two, simply outpacing their swings before flying up slightly and weaving around the rod that held the next few swinging pendulums. He flapped the wings to speed up again as he began twisting slightly, twisting in the air as he began rushing through the final section. The end was in sight. He could just see it. He sped up. He flapped his wings of green lightning twice more. He blurred across the finish line. He stretched the wings to try and slow himself. And ended up hitting the wall. "Oh, that's a wipeout," Hawks commented. Izuku comically slid down, and just slumped against the wall. Yeah, remember it takes time to slow down. Like driving a car. Not a useful analogy. Never driven, Izuku mumbled as he rubbed his head. Dark Shadow patted the boy on the back in pity, whilst Tokoyami was seemingly hiding laughter. Yeah, well, it could have been worse. Come on, get up, let's go together. The trio flew through the course together, occasionally taking non-committed attacks at one another, before they inevitably grew tired and retired for the night. Ready for what tomorrow brought? Izuku yawned before checking the time. 0700. There was still a while before he needed to be ready for today. He was due to go with Hawks to the hero chart announcements. Whilst they were already fairly well known, at least for the top 3, the lower numbers were less known. It was a good chance for the citizens of Japan to get to know the best of their heroes. And so he got to help Hawks practice his speech. Hawks told him that Tokoyami would be staying back whilst Hawks and Izuku made their way to a different city, since Tokoyami was going to be doing some solo patrols, whilst Hawks and Izuku flew to the location of the hero charts. If Izuku was unlucky, they would be there whilst Hawks tried to talk to Endeavor. It was going to be interesting to say the least. For now though, he was putting on his hero costume to prepare for today's flight. He and Hawks were going for a long-haul flight. They had already registered their low-altitude flight warnings and were ready to go. All he needed was a small pack of water, snacks and pajamas. He had his phone in one pocket and a flashlight in the other. The presentation was tomorrow, and they would arrive at their hotel sometime tonight. He texted Nejire to say he wouldn't be contactable for a little while, and prepared for takeoff. He made his final checks of energy, said goodbye to Tokoyami, and waited on the roof for Hawks. Once Hawks arrived, he smiled at his intern. Ready? Yep. Everyone's been notified and I've got all my stuff. Izuku responded, smiling. Great, I've packed some extra energy snacks, like chocolate and candy and stuff, and definitely healthy food. Yep. Let's go. Hawks said as he ran by Izuku, before jumping at the roof. He let himself fall a few meters before spreading his wings rapidly and soaring into the air with a few beats, and beginning to speed up. Izuku was quick to follow, instead opting to run directly off the roof, and the moment his feet were off he formed his wings, and with a powerful beat and clap of lightning, he sped up next to Hawks. Buckle up, kiddo. We got a several-hour flight. Yes, sir. Izuku responded. Don't call me sir, I'm not that old. The two began speeding up after the short exchange, Izuku following Hawks directly behind, saving him some energy as Hawks was more used to breaking the air whilst Izuku less so. He hadn't been flying for so long, and as such he didn't really have that much chance to practice. For now though, the two flying heroes began twisting in the air, forming a small vortex around them as they sped up, traveling significantly faster than most of the cars on the ground. Remember kid, keep north. Hawks said as the two sped up even more. As the hawk flies. Izuku quipped in response, eliciting a slight chuckle from Hawks. I'm liking you more and more. Come on. Hawks said, and he put in his earplugs, prompting Izuku to do the same. With another 2 beats, they had both broken the sound barrier. Izuku, soaring through the sky, loved the feeling of the freedom of flight. He felt the wind on his face, he was in complete control and he loved it. It was so freeing. He held his arms out just for the sake of it, and felt his hero costume ripple in the strong airflow. He could get used to this. Many hours later, and an exhausted Izuku and a slightly tired Hawks landed outside their hotel. The two contacted Hawks' hero agency to inform them of their safe arrival, and Izuku let Nejire know, who at some point had mentioned that Eri wanted to do a video call of some sort tonight, and Izuku quickly said he'd love to. Alright kiddo, it's about 7 PM now, so we'll have dinner and sleep soon. I'll be going over my script for tomorrow, but I can see you're exhausted. Yeah. My wings aren't exactly built into my back, and my quirk is kind of based off of energy. Izuku yawned as they made their way up the stairs to their floor. They were on the 8th floor, 5th room. Once they made it there, they unlocked the room and quickly unpacked what they needed. Izuku changed into his pajamas, before setting up his phone to FaceTime Nejire. It was only 7:15 now, so Eri should still be awake. It dialed a few times before Nejire picked up. Izuku smiled tiredly. Nejire beamed. Eri jumped in the camera happily, showing off something she had made with Nezu. Izuku smiled and asked her questions about it, before Nejire sent her off to brush her teeth and get changed for the night. The couple shared a relaxed conversation, various topics drifting, before Eri came bursting back into the room Nejire was in, declaring she was ready for bed. Eri's parents giggled before telling the little girl they loved her, and Izuku promised to call again when he could. The FaceTime closed with a beep, and Izuku set his phone up to run a few things, whilst he went to eat dinner with Hawks. Ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. Hopefully. Except Endeavor. That could wait forever. Izuku yawned as his alarm went off, early in the morning. It was barely light out when he rose to go eat breakfast, simultaneously scrolling through the news. He found a few pointless articles, several reports regarding the decline of villainy despite All Might's retirement, credited to the simultaneous takedown of the League of Villains. There were a few things regarding several bank robberies, but nothing that was left unsolved or with permanent injuries or casualties. Everything seemed to be fairly peaceful in Japan at the moment. It was relaxing. Izuku ate his breakfast whilst Hawks was flying through the hotel room, trying to throw everything he needed together. He had a small USB thing that plugged into his visor with prompts. Unfortunately, it was micro SD card size. So whilst Izuku began sipping his tea casually, Hawks was occasionally making breezes through the living room, causing Izuku's hair to go crazy each time. It was kind of amusing. By the time they had to leave, Izuku had a small pack of snacks and his hero suit on whilst Hawks pressed out the creases in the leather jacket. Maybe the stress was getting to the now number 2 pro hero. They jogged slightly until they arrived at the location, where there was a line for the standard public, a line for press, a line for VIPs, and a separate line for heroes. There was no security detail. Didn't really need to think too much about why. Alright kiddo, you head into the VIP line since you're an intern with me. Just hand them this card, Hawks said, pulling a small card out of his jacket and handing it to Izuku before continuing. If you need anything, you're on priority in my phone, which I should have. Right. Here. Aha. And just give him a buzz if you need something. Take care. Hawks said as he went into the hero line. Don't forget the SD card. Izuku yelled, and Hawks suddenly stopped before pulling it out of his jacket and quickly plugging it in, before snapping his fingers and doing finger guns to Izuku. Thanks, kiddo. He called out as he continued. Izuku just chuckled before making his way into the VIP line, much to the irritation of many press groups, forced to wait in the ever-growing press line. He pulled the card out for the poor soul that was checking them all, and trying to manage some of the crowds. He wandered on in and sat in the third row, close enough to the front to not miss anything, but not so close to the front he'd have to strain his neck. He noticed an interesting news story about people writing fanfictions between certain heroes. He noticed there was a list of the most popular ones. There was a lot of gay ones between him and Bakugo, and several between him and Todoroki. A lot of him being a villain. It kind of terrified him. Although there was a lot of, what was it called? Crackfics. They were a little chaotic, although intriguing. But there was also some of him in Nejire. He did not know why the teenage heroes were more popular for this. Actually no, he did. It was probably mostly teenagers reading this stuff. His thoughts were broken by the sudden announcement that the hero charts were going to start. He had a notebook out and was taking notes on various information that was casually dropped, such as new hinted moves or special details regarding each hero. He was really excited about this though, and put it away to just enjoy the event with a massive smile on his face. Alright everyone. Introducing your new number 10 hero, Ryukyu. And with that the event really started. By the end of it, Izuku honestly thought it could have gone far better. It still could have gone far worse though. I mean, there were few things worse than having to endure a meeting with Endeavor. But he really didn't like that part still. And Endeavor's speech left a lot to be lacking. Like, literally everything. But for now he and Hawks were walking down the street with Endeavor towards some fancy restaurant that Hawks had gotten them bookings for. Hawks was lecturing Endeavor about basic human interaction, whilst Izuku was kind of just there for the ride. Hawks was helping various people with his feathers as he talked, and Izuku was talking to some of the hopeful young heroes, mostly primary school students, but there were a few high school students from other hero schools as well. A lot wanted to know about one of the students involved with the takedown of the villain that was comparable to All Might. That and apparently his fight with Overhaul did not go unheard of. There were clips of green lightning soaring across the sky that some people had captured from towards the end of the fight, as he had dispersed the energy. Not important right now. He smiled as he talked to some of the younger children, all with a sparkle in their eyes, as he demonstrated his quirk to them. He could feel an annoyed Endeavor glaring at him, and it only made Izuku smile more as more kids began flocking to him as he told them some stories of his classmates. Hawks watched on proudly, before a very nervous fan came up to Endeavor, asking for an autograph. None said anything, before the flame hero quietly signed it and the crowd devolved into chaos. Endeavor sighed in disappointment, Hawks chuckled, and Izuku was trying not to hunch over in laughter. After a brief debacle, Izuku left all the children with some form of signature, after they asked him to sign various things before they finally made it to the restaurant. Endeavor and Hawks were discussing some form of weird business partnership, whilst Izuku just happened to be there, where he was going through some extra ideas Nezu had sent to him at some point. They were up on the 15th floor overlooking the street below them. Izuku was spacing out a little bit as he stared at the equations he had written down. He was vaguely registering Endeavor and Hawks talking and pulled his hood down and pulled his mouthguard off to tinker with it. It recently had been fixed to work as a filter, whilst also allowing him to breathe to some extent underwater. In theory it could work in space, save the fact that he'd freeze. Or explode. Or implode. There was a lot wrong with space he didn't want to try. He was spacing out when he heard a bizarre noise. He closed his eyes and focused. He absent-mindedly hushed Endeavor and Hawks, the former of which was going to complain before Hawks told him to be quiet. Izuku extended his hearing. It was really fast. Fast as Hawks. It was big though, a really high mass. It was. Everybody get down. Izuku screamed as he flipped the table up and shoved it against the window, just before something came crashing into it. He could feel whatever it was crash into it before backing up slightly and trying again. This time, he sent a powerful blast of green lightning into the table to reinforce it, and hold it together enough for the creature to then back away, before letting out a glass-shattering screech, causing Izuku to instinctively cover his ears. He could hear Endeavor and Hawks talking faintly, before the two of them jumped out, and confronted the thing. It was strong. It was dangerous. Izuku put in his earpiece and could hear Hawks talking through the device to Endeavor. This was not looking good. He could hear Hawks and Endeavor talking through the earpiece, but also the raspy voice of whatever the creature was. Are you strong? What are these things, Hawks? Endeavor responded, ignoring the creature's question as he glared it at. I dunno, seems like one of those Nomu creations, he responded. Hey kid, you with us? Yeah, I am. I think it's a Nomu, but it's far stronger. A final stand from a rogue member maybe, a final attempt. Throwing together all they have, Izuku responded through the earpiece as he helped people evacuate the buildings. I think we need city-wide evacuation. This isn't going to end well otherwise. You got a kid, I'll do that ASAP and you help Endeavor out. What? I don't need the brat's help, especially one who is weaker than Shoto. Shut the fuck up, Endeavor, and take his help. I'm off, good luck and try not to die. I won't die, bird. I wasn't talking to you, hothead. At this, Hawks flew to land somewhere, before dispersing as many of his feathers as he could spare while still maintaining movement. Izuku prepared to assist Endeavor, who was currently rearing a fist back. Kid. I need to know, what's the governing policy for emergency evac buttons in this city? Top floor, unsecured room, should be ventilation access to each if you send a feather through each duct. To track it, each send out a slight pulse every few seconds for this purpose. Hold it for 3 seconds, and it'll trigger emergency evacuation on full alert. Got it. Izuku turned his attention back to Endeavor, who was still in a stare down with the Nomu, which began talking. I am a high-end Nomu. It introduced itself, designed to be strong. It pointed at Endeavor, and to beat you. Pathetic. Nomu regeneration are weak to flames, and that's all I am. Yeah, pretty much flame brain, Izuku thought sarcastically as he began pressing buttons on his right gauntlet, causing it to pop off 2 small metallic buttons. As if on cue, Endeavor fired a flash fire fist at the creature, however it seemed to only cause impact damage, and minimal at that. What? I thought all Nomu were weak to fire. Endeavor asked in shock, and Izuku began hovering in the air beside the hero, only using a crackling from his feet to remain in place in the air. No, this one is designed to beat you, and presumably a culmination of all remaining resources the final member had. Being fireproof would probably be a baseline, and considering they had fire members in the love, it wouldn't have been too hard to implement, Izuku told him, before asking, how are you flying? It's glorified, not falling. You're not doing much better. I can properly fly, this takes less energy. This is going to be a long fight. I don't need your help, brat. Leave it to the professionals. Endeavor replied. Are you sure? The Nomu had returned, before producing a horrifying grin that reminded Izuku of Shigaraki. Very well. Let us fight without distractions, it declared, before all its limbs detached and propelled towards the evacuating civilians. The torso of the main Nomu quickly regrew the lost limbs, and the flying limbs began to grow as Nomu. Damn it. I'll deal with those, Izuku said as he twisted in the air and released a burst of lightning from his feet to propel himself fast enough to try and catch up. Hawks. We got Nomus heading to the evacuees. I'll cut them off, but I'll need help to finish them, Izuku said through the earpiece. Got a kid, I've hit all the evac buttons, I'll be there in a moment, Hawks replied immediately. Izuku began spinning as he created a large bolt of lightning in his right hand, crackling as he managed to catch up to a gangly grey Nomu. He brought it down on the Nomu's exposed brain, causing a hideous screech that Izuku resisted the urge to flinch from the noise and splattering blood. However, he noticed it didn't even seem to have a trace of regeneration. There really are decoys, he thought to himself as he heard the screeching of another Nomu, along with a loud whirring that sounded like a jet engine. He twisted himself in that direction and quickly propelled himself that way, presuming the biggest threat of the Nomu was over there. At least the biggest threat that Endeavor was installing. With a loud boom of thunder as he went flying off in the direction of the noise, to find a horrifying sight. There was the Nomu he heard. It was about to attack a mother and her child that were towards the back of the evacuation. He gritted his teeth and sped up further, arms outstretched. The whirring noise was coming from the Nomu's upper right shoulder, which was a massive jet engine, and had a cover on it. A quick touch of analysis meant he knew it was preparing a supersonic air bullet that would rip through basically anything, little children included. Izuku saw the Nomu about to release the bullet and reacted instantaneously, using a decent amount of pre-stored energy in his legs to fly forward suddenly, grabbing the Nomu and swinging it towards the ground. It landed face down on the ground as the whirring stabilized. It was saving the shot now. It had a new target. There was still at least another 2 minor Nomu, and Izuku really didn't have time to waste on this. Izuku gritted his teeth and yelled for everyone to keep evacuating, as he grabbed the arm of the Nomu and throwing it into the air. With a sonic boom from the strength of his throw thanks to the lightning coursing through his veins, before jumping up towards it. In the air the Nomu rotated itself to let out a screech at Izuku, and fired the projectile at him. Izuku didn't slow down as he pointed his left hand upwards, producing a bolt of green lightning to protect him and disperse the air bullet harmlessly into the air. He had his right hand pulled back ready to punch. He waited for the Nomu to reach the apex of its flight, before it began to come back down slightly. As it did so, it screeched at Izuku and began extending its arm to grab Izuku. Izuku, however, attacked first. He punched his fist forward, and with it sent a bolt of lightning that struck the Nomu, stunning it as the impact shattered a hole where it struck in the creature's chest. It seemed to kill the creature. Izuku knew that trying to take mercy right now was not going to work, and last he talked with Nezu about it. The Nomu didn't have the same rights as even the highest level villains did to safety and mercy. In other words, he could be fighting to kill, if there weren't so many people about. Nearby he saw Hawks shred one of the Nomu with his feathers, whilst avoiding the strikes from the more armored one he couldn't properly deal with. Izuku turned back to the Nomu he had just finished off, seeing it flying into higher layers of the atmosphere, and beginning to burn from the initial friction and speed, before it dispersed into a dust cloud. Maybe a side effect of them being basically mini Nomu. That didn't matter, what did was helping Hawks out. Thankfully everyone seemed to have evacuated already, and so Hawks had the attention of 2 of the remaining Nomu, after having shredded one of them already. One being the armored one, the other seeming to be preparing some kind of beam attack. Hawks. I'll take the armored one, Izuku said as he flew down with lightning crackling at his feet, preparing to tackle it. Alright kid, watch out for its claws though, Hawks said as he dodged a swipe of the aforementioned weapons, before tackling the one charging a beam weapon within its arm. The armored Nomu seemed confused, before grunting and looking up at Izuku who kicked it across its face, and finding out just how hard the armor was. He grimaced in pain from the recoil as he then jumped back before the creature could swipe at him. The Nomu looked at him, screeched, and launched at him. Izuku, now on the ground, dodged to the side, and the Nomu crashed into the ground, burying itself into the road before getting up and roaring. Izuku however was faster, his hands on the ground as he used his lightning to break the ground into pieces, causing the Nomu to fall into the sudden hole in the road. It struggled to get out of Izuku's trap, who proceeded to then annihilate it with a high voltage of green lightning. It screeched in agony as the voltage ripped through it, completely frying it in a matter of moments. Izuku, after finishing it off, turned to Hawks who had finished slicing the beam-based Nomu up, which had fallen into chunks on the ground, bleeding out. It was not a pleasant scene, but neither had time to ponder it. Alright kid, we should go help Endeavor. I may not be of much use though, it's far too much out of my range, and if it's what it probably is. Endeavor can't hurt it. He's fighting a Nomu that definitely has some form of fire resistance, along with heat resistance, if not straight up being fire and heat proof. How long do you think you can stall on your own, so I can evac Endeavor? Izuku asked as the two took to the skies, Izuku still saving his wings, and using basic propulsion from his legs. 5 minutes absolute max kiddo, the thing is just as if not faster than me, and far stronger and more durable than my feathers could ever hope to protect from let alone cut through, Hawks responded, the two flying in tandem, as they followed the path of destruction from Endeavor and the Nomu. That should be more than enough, Izuku thought, losing himself slightly in thought as they finally made it. It was not a pretty sight. Endeavor beaten into the ground with anything the Nomu had used retracted back into the Nomu's body. How disappointing, it rasped, you should have listened to the kid. He was right. You're weak. To me. The creature declared before it whipped its head around to stare at Izuku and Hawks. And so are you, it declared before shooting out a supersonic tendril at Hawks and Izuku, who each dodged in a different direction. The hero and student nodded at each other, as Hawks released a small barrage to keep the Nomu's attention, whilst Izuku went to grab Endeavor. It was, despite his intense injuries that decidedly made his face much better, absolutely fuming, both literally and metaphorically. Out of the corner of his eye, and ignoring Endeavor running his mouth off, Izuku watched as Hawks began a flurry of attacks with several dozen feathers, each piercing through the Nomu, creating brief holes in the creature that refilled themselves almost immediately, but caused enough of a nuisance to the Nomu that it glared at Hawks, and Izuku would have joked that it was going to shoot laser beams, but it'd be more accurate to say it shot needle bursts from a hole it opened in its body. That Hawks was able to barely dodge, his jacket being clipped slightly. Izuku had to crush the instinct to help his mentor, and instead swiftly lifted Endeavor over his shoulder, and using lightning bursts from his feet to fly as far as he could in 2 minutes, close to some evac crews. They were shocked to see the state of the #1 pro hero, reduced to a bleeding mess and completely out of energy, his once vivid flames reduced to a simple smolder that a high schooler with an untrained fire quirk could produce. It wasn't really until then that Izuku actually fully understood what he had to do. He had to be the strongest. Izuku was on his phone, quickly shooting attacks off whilst he was flying back to the action, Endeavor being evacuated as he spoke. He sent as few words as possible, before turning his phone off and speeding up, still saving his wings. Meanwhile, Hawks was fighting the Nomu. Just 5 minutes was his mantra. He was a good hero because he was fast. He was fast enough to produce more force and make up for his lack of strength. But the Nomu was just as fast, and he didn't think it was even trying yet. Honestly, he was terrified. But he had to hold on. He pulled his feathers around his right half as a shield against an attack of tendrils, whilst he kept his left half facing away from the Nomu. Each tendril bounced off the makeshift shield, before Hawks quickly pulled them back onto himself, before backing away to dodge some form of overhead attack from the condensed tentacles. He flapped sharply several times, lifting his legs off the ground, so he wasn't dragging his feet as the Nomu leaped at him, the tendrils retracting into its body as it prepared some other attack, which Hawks was not looking forward to. He had been doing some practice of analysis thanks to Izuku, who had been breaking down criminals' quirks on the news with him as practice for the student, and the mentor who was quietly taking notes with one of his feathers. It didn't help that the Nomu was basically just doing random stuff, with speed that was approaching a blur even to him. The Nomu's tendrils for now though, were gone, and instead he heard a noise that he could only compare to the screeching of something out of a horror movie. He could feel a sharp pain in his ears, but had to ignore it to focus on the fight in front of him. Unfortunately, the creature was becoming something out of a horror movie too. It screeched facing upwards, and if Hawks was more courageous, or more foolish as one would be more inclined to put it, he may have decided to attack the Nomu in its current state. He was neither, thankfully, and opted to back away to a distance that was best for him, and waited, poised, and watched as the Nomu almost morphed into a different version. Spikes came out of its back, and the horrible screeching continued as its arms folded back into themselves, multiplying over into a series of tendrils instead. The once vaguely humanoid creature was now a torso with a series of spinning tendrils in place of arms, the massive legs that would make Mirko feel weak, and a hooded face with a deathly glare and spikes, coming out of the back of its head and neck. And Hawks, safe to say, was terrified. He was quick to notice the spikes about to shoot out of the creature, and quickly tightened the feather shield around his right, layering the feathers to be denser as each spike launched, semi-shattering each time it hit. However, it was slowly chipping away at his minimal defenses. Gritting his teeth, he released his clenched fist and sent his to return to his back, where he quickly reformed his wings, as he jumped back to avoid a strike of a mass of the tendrils. He skidded back, tearing up his shoes, but that wasn't a problem. What was more of a problem was the terrifying nature of how the asphalt before him was completely decimated by the swarm of lashing tendrils that were spinning faster than he could fly. The moment it made contact with the asphalt of the road, it completely tore it to tiny pieces that flew into the sky like little gray snow that would ruin anyone's day. Apparently except the Nomu's though, because it dashed through it, the tendrils lashing out. Because it ran through the cloud of asphalt fragments, it tore them even tinier, creating a cloud of the asphalt. Normally Hawks would have an advantage here, but he knew he didn't. There was no way the Nomu would even be slightly affected by this. If anything, the Nomu had an advantage since Hawks couldn't be certain about what it was currently doing. Instead, after thinking quickly, he took to the skies with a few powerful flaps of his wings, but remained facing towards the dust cloud. It suddenly cleared away with a powerful sound wave that Hawks winced at. It was ear-piercing, and his flight path dipped slightly as he covered his ears in pain. He resisted the urge to flinch further, making sure to keep an eye on the Nomu, which was currently just staring at him, almost blankly. And yet, it seemed so much more than that. Hawk's eyes widened when the Nomu crouched tight, and shot up faster than a speeding bullet. Reacting quickly, he dodged to the right with a massive flap of his wings, however the Nomu managed to clip a few in the process. There were only maybe half a dozen of the feathers gone, but these feathers were long lost, shredded beyond recognition, as they fell in a cloud of soft red dust to the ground. Meanwhile, Hawks and the Nomu were playing a game of cat and mouse, currently where Hawks was dashing in various directions around the air, not really changing altitude, as the Nomu zipped past him trying to catch him with a massive extended jaw that was filled to the brim with whirring spikes. He could feel the occasional feather being sucked into the spikes and shredded to bits, and it started to show as the tips of his wings were no longer the pristine edges he prided himself on, but jagged and frayed. And it hadn't even been a full minute. He could feel his muscles aching, and decided it was do or die time, literally. He began beating his wings, causing powerful air currents to be sent towards the Nomu. Several of the tentacles were ripped off the Nomu, falling towards the ground before they suddenly stiffened and started flying with a point like a needle towards Hawks. The Nomu grinned deviously as it basically floated in midair, the spikes flying rapidly from behind. Hawks was quick to use his left hand to press some buttons on his glasses, pulling up various tracking information of each projectile. Hawks brought his arms across his body, and with them brought a significant chunk of his feathers, covering his body in a sort of layered armor, whilst still leaving just enough to be able to move in the air still. And then, the barrage of spikes came. The winged hero was quick to avoid many of them, however felt the sting of several of the spikes hitting him regardless. He chuckled to himself thinking how he'll feel those bruises in a week time. It was one of the things many of the high-level pro heroes did. To make it through battles they knew they were more likely to die and than survive, even with grievous injuries. Hull themselves to a promise of sorts, whether through stupid thoughts or thoughts of family and loved ones. Hawks honestly suspected that was why Endeavor never did so well in such high-stakes situations. He didn't have an anchor. He didn't have a particular reason to see tomorrow, especially now he had achieved his lifelong goal, albeit not in a way he particularly wanted. That wasn't the point. Currently Hawks was gritting his teeth and feeling blood trickle down his arms, as his hands were the least armored, and the Nomu had picked up on that, redirecting several of the attacks. Hawks didn't dare look at his hands as he felt the pain of moving them, his left hand only mildly sore, whilst his right hand was at least fractured, if not broken and borderline useless. With his left hand he reached into one of his jacket pockets as he spun to the left, avoiding another tendril before tumbling to the ground, as his limited feathers hadn't yet returned to the wing formation. He was spinning a bandage around his right hand quickly, as the Nomu screeched from the sky once more, spinning rapidly in the air as it rotated to have its head facing Hawks. And it began soaring down like a meteor, soon to be meteorite. Hawks, having had finished bandaging his arm, quickly dodged the incoming missile of a creature as he tumbled to the left, his wings now fully reformed, as he stretched them out in a move that was typically quite intimidating to his opponents. The Nomu saw it as a challenge. As it dragged itself out of the ground, it fixed Hawks with a crooked grin that was terrifying, with its tendrils retracting into its body. It screeched once more, and Hawks was certain he'd have some level of tinnitus by the end of the fight. His GP was going to kill him. That was if he survived whatever the Nomu did next, which was of course horrifying. The body of it almost opened up, the legs twisting and morphing into those of an eagle with claws at the end that reminded him of hydraulic crushers, as it gripped the asphalt below, squeezing the large chunks into dust. And of course, the massive wings that thrusted out of its back, dwarfing Hawk's own pair by at least twice the size. And the way it almost pulsed from the slight shuffling of each black tendril, as though it was a series of muscle fibers, beating with a dangerous presence. It flapped them once, a creepy grin on its face, and the massive resulting gust caused 2 air bullets to form, ripping the asphalt, and Hawks was only barely able to notice it in time, flying upwards. However, he wasn't quite fast enough, and the tip of his foot was clipped by the air bullet. He winced as he felt the significant force on his foot, and had to think fast. If he farted, there was no way he'd get out with a functioning foot, if not a fully broken leg. So, he let the wind take him until he could just about get out of it, being propelled forward with it, as he turned to glide with the air bullet. However, he could hear the Nomu cackling, and a powerful beat of its wings indicated that it was taking off, flying towards the hero who was currently being propelled towards a building. At the last possible moment, to reduce the impact of it, Hawks brought his wings in front of him to cocoon himself, as he felt the sudden slamming from several concrete walls of the building, thankfully already evacuated. He felt himself tumble through multiple walls until he came to a stop. As he gently released his wings, he could hear the rushing of the Nomu coming at him, and was going to prime himself, but found himself in decent pain. Despite the adrenaline rushing through his veins, he felt pain in his right arm, which had become a dreadful purple with several cuts along it. Must have subconsciously used that as a shield as I flew through the walls, Hawks reasoned, continuing his very quick self-evaluation. This didn't even account for the foot that caught the bullet, which was probably dislocated and in great pain, thankfully not broken or dislocated any higher up on the leg. And then the probably hairline fractures all over his body after flying through so many walls, in his ribs and various other bones. He saw a black blur of Nomu rushing towards him, bringing down walls as it went, and Hawks was only able to do one thing. He brought his wings forward. He pointed them at the creature. And released a volley of feathers. It hardly even bothered the creature, however, once all of his feathers made contact he began redirecting the Nomu, which was only slightly. He had to hope this worked, otherwise the mass of black tendrils would slam into him, probably tearing him to shreds. The Nomu noticed the slight shift in direction, and did its best to fight the shift in trajectory, by angling its wings, however Hawks knew exactly how to adapt to the way the Nomu was shifting. And of course, with the speed the Nomu was going at, it couldn't stop without tearing itself to shreds and making it incredibly vulnerable. No matter what the Nomu did, Hawks was currently in control of its movements. Because whilst it had the raw strength, it lacked the experience with flight that Hawks had, and so Hawks was in control for now. And there was about a 15-degree angle change from the Nomu's traditional trajectory, who was now directed into the floor almost directly above Hawks. Hawks was quick to hide behind a nearby pillar, from which he could see an exit within limping distance, but he couldn't quite run, because if he even lost sight for a moment, he wouldn't be able to tell what the creature was doing. He watched from behind the pillar as the Nomu wrestled for control, however it knew it couldn't do much, as it began retracting the wings to change to something else. Hawks wouldn't dare guess what, it was completely unpredictable. All he had to do was survive. The rumbling of the building indicated the Nomu did indeed crash through the floor, but with its continued momentum, Hawks opted to redirect it, as it was no longer fighting to control direction, and Hawks began limping out of the building. Not moments after he was out of the building, it began crumbling on top of the Nomu. He knew the impact force would do barely anything, at best it would briefly remove a chunk or two in its torso, and just slow its next attack. But it was enough. Unfortunately it cost him most of his feathers, each of his wings barely able to let him fly as he recollected the few feathers left, most buried deep under rubble they could neither break nor move, and many more were broken. He prepared to take off with a pair of wings that were feathers compared to his original pair, when he could see a streak of green in the sky, lightning crackling in many directions from it. He couldn't help but take in the beauty of the formation of the lightning across the sky. In a flash it had begun landing, and was grinding up the road as it did so. Hawks limped over to Izuku, who looked horrified at the injuries his mentor had taken. "Don't worry about me, kid, are you sure you can do this?" "I could probably." Hawks was cut off by Izuku, who smiled at him, a determined glint in his eyes that crackled with lightning. "It doesn't matter if I can. I have to," he responded, and Hawks gave him a somber smile. "Give him hell, kid." And with that, Izuku nodded and braced himself with a cloak of lightning, and Hawks couldn't help but feel like he had just sold his humanity as he flew away on broken wings, leaving a child to fight in his place. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.